The Marten reached the stone wall just after dusk. This wall had always been useful, not as a barrier, but as a line of opportunities. Stacked stones unevenly placed, mortar missing in places, gaps wide enough for a slender body to pass through without slowing. Along it, movement stayed broken, sight lines fractured, escape routes multiplied. The Marten slipped toward it with confidence born of repetition, and stopped. Something had changed. The stones were still there, cold and irregular, lichen clinging to their faces. But the spaces between them were different. Where gaps had once opened unpredictably, there were now fills, smaller stones wedged tightly, soil pressed in, edges smoothed. The gaps were gone. The Marten lowered his head and sniffed along the base. Fresh disturbance lingered faintly, dry earth, crushed moss, the dull scent of human handling. Not strong, not recent enough to warn outright, but present enough to explain the difference. He tested the first familiar opening. His whiskers touched stone almost immediately. No give, no hollow behind it. The gap that once let him vanish sideways now ended in packed rubble. He tried another, same result. The wall had been repaired. Not carefully, but thoroughly enough to remove what mattered. The Marten pressed closer, body low, tail extended straight behind him to balance as he moved along the stones. His claws found purchase easily, but there was nowhere to slip into, nowhere to break outline. The wall no longer spoke in interruptions. It had become a surface. This was dangerous. Marten survived by movement that could be redirected instantly, darting through cracks, appearing and disappearing faster than a predator could commit. Without gaps, the wall forced linear travel, turning a once flexible route into a corridor. He paused beneath a section that had always offered 3 exits within a body length. All 3 were sealed. The Marten lifted his head and listened. Sound travelled cleanly now. His claws scraping lightly on stone echoed farther than they should have. The wall reflected noise instead of absorbing it. This was not just loss of passage, it was loss of unpredictability. He backed away slightly and reassessed from a short distance. From here, the wall looked intact, even solid, exactly what humans wanted from it. From his perspective, it had lost its value. He moved again, faster this time, testing whether speed alone could replace concealment. It could not. Without gaps, speed only increased exposure. He stopped once more, muscles tight, ears rotating. The land beyond the wall still held cover, hedges, fallen logs, uneven ground, but the wall itself was no longer a place to pause, slip, or reappear elsewhere. It was now something to pass beside, not through. The Marten turned away, not fully retreating, but abandoning the line. He angled toward deeper cover, choosing ground that folded rather than aligned. The wall remained behind him, silent and closed, offering nothing he could use. It had not become hostile, it had become neutral. And neutrality, for a hunter that depended on options appearing mid-movement, was enough to force a change. The Marten disappeared into brush where gaps still existed, not in stone, but in shadow, leaf litter, and uneven ground. Behind him, the stone wall stood complete, orderly, and smooth. The gaps were gone, and with them, the reason he had trusted this place to let him move without committing fully to any single direction. The Marten returned before full night. Not immediately, after the land cooled and the last human sounds faded into distance. This was when changes revealed themselves most clearly, when fresh work either announced itself loudly or blended back into the ground. He approached the wall from the opposite end. This mattered. Walls rarely changed evenly. Repairs were often partial, leaving stretches untouched where old habits still worked. He moved low through grass and leaf litter, angling in at a place where the stones dipped slightly and the wall leaned with age. He reached the base and stopped. Here too, the gaps were gone. Stones that had once shifted under pressure now held firm. Smaller rocks had been wedged deliberately into voids that used to open into darkness. Soil had been pressed behind them, sealing depth and killing echo. The Marten tested with a forepaw. No movement. He slid his head along the stone face, whiskers tracing seams where air once moved freely. Now nothing breathed. The wall had become airtight enough to matter. This was not patchwork. It was intent. He moved along the length again, slower now, counting by body lengths, checking each remembered opening in turn. Every one had been closed, some crudely, some neatly, but all effectively. The wall had been simplified. Simplification was dangerous. Irregular structures broke attention. Predictable ones invited pursuit. The Marten climbed partway up and paused on a narrow ledge. From here, he could see the field on one side and the darker woodland edge on the other. Once, the wall allowed him to move between these spaces invisibly. Now, any crossing required full exposure. He listened. Nothing followed, but nothing helped either. The wall no longer absorbed sound. His breathing felt too present. Even stillness seemed louder than it should have been. He dropped back to the ground and backed away, reassessing distance. From farther out, the wall's outline was clean, continuous, unbroken. It looked strong. It was. Strong enough to remove choice. The Marten shifted direction again, moving parallel but farther from the stones, testing whether shadow cast by the wall could substitute for missing gaps. It could not. The shadow lay thin and straight, offering concealment only if nothing moved. Movement was his language. Stillness was not. He crossed behind a fallen tree and paused beneath its roots, letting the earth and tangled wood reassert depth. Here, sound softened. Air moved irregularly. Options returned. From this position, the wall was no longer useful. It was simply there. The Marten waited a long time, letting memory and reality settle into alignment. There would be no rediscovery of a hidden gap later. No missed opening revealed by a different angle or better light. The structure had been changed beyond recovery. He adjusted his map. Routes that once ran along the wall would now arc away from it. Time would be spent in ground that folded and resisted, rather than along a surface that forced linear movement. The wall would remain as boundary only, not passage, not cover, not opportunity. As he moved off into deeper shadow, the stone wall stood unchanged behind him, every gap filled, every interruption removed. It did not block him, it simply offered nothing. And for a hunter that survived on choices appearing mid-step, that absence mattered more than any physical barrier ever could. The confirmation came from movement that was not his. The Marten was moving through brush parallel to the wall when sound arrived from the open side. Not sudden, not loud, but purposeful. Footsteps, spaced evenly, crossing the field at an angle that would bring them near the stones. Human. Not close yet, but approaching. The Marten froze beneath a hawthorn thicket, body compressed, tail tucked tight to reduce outline. From here, he could still see the wall clearly. The humans would reach it soon. He watched. They did not inspect the wall closely. They did not need to. Their movements slowed slightly as they reached it, then followed its line, using it as a guide rather than an obstacle. That was the danger. Walls once confused pursuit by offering exits. Now, the wall simplified movement. For everyone. The humans' footsteps echoed faintly against stone, sharper than they should have been. The wall reflected sound outward instead of absorbing it. Each step announced position cleanly, but it also revealed how predictable the path had become. The Marten shifted deeper into cover, keeping parallel but increasing distance. His movement remained silent here, absorbed by leaf litter and uneven ground. If he had been on the wall itself, there would have been no choice. He would have had to run. The humans passed the section where his favourite gap had once been. They did not pause. There was nothing to inspect, nothing to slip through, nothing that invited curiosity. The wall had become a corridor. Corridors attracted traffic. This was the final proof. A structure that removed irregularity did not just reduce escape options, it redirected movement patterns for everything that encountered it. Where complexity once scattered paths, simplicity concentrated them. The Marten waited until the humans were gone, their sound thinning and breaking as they moved beyond the wall's influence. Only then did he move again. He crossed farther away now, slipping through a tangle of fallen branches where ground rose and fell unpredictably. From here, the wall was partially hidden, its clean line broken by vegetation and shadow. This was where he belonged. He did not return to the wall that night, nor the next. The closure had changed more than stone spacing. It had altered how attention moved through the landscape. It had turned a once-safe boundary into a predictable route for larger bodies that did not need concealment. The Marten adapted without ceremony. He shifted his hunting ground deeper into woodland where fallen trees and root systems restored the interruptions he depended on. Travel slowed, but safety returned. Sound layered again. Movement could be revised mid-step. The wall remained behind him, intact and orderly, drawing movement rather than dispersing it. The gaps were gone, and with them, the wall had ceased to be a place of opportunity, becoming instead a line that others followed confidently, unaware of what it had cost the smaller life that once moved unseen along its broken edges. The Marten did not return to the wall. Not the next night, not after rain, not when frost tightened stone and made the ground speak more clearly. Time passed, and the land settled into its altered shape. Moss began to reclaim some of the packed soil at the wall's base, but the filled gaps remained firm. Small stones did not loosen. Nothing shifted back. The closure held. The Marten's movement changed accordingly. Roots that once traced the wall now curved away from it, threading through woodland where fallen branches lay as they had dropped, unarranged and incomplete. Here, gaps existed everywhere, not fixed openings, but moments of passage that appeared and disappeared with angle and speed. This was acceptable. He hunted deeper now, where sound fractured naturally and sightlines broke without effort. Travel took longer, but it allowed adjustment. Each step could still become another step in a different direction. That mattered more than efficiency. Once, from a ridge above the field, the Marten looked down and saw the wall again, a clean, continuous line dividing spaces that no longer leaked into one another. Humans moved along it easily, their paths drawn toward its certainty. The Marten watched without reaction. The wall no longer invited him. It had become a guide for others, not a tool for him. In the following weeks, prey adjusted too. Small animals avoided the wall's base, crossing instead through brush and uneven ground. Movement redistributed. The landscape rewrote itself quietly, not by removal, but by preference. The Marten followed those shifts. He raised young in places where escape did not depend on memory of a single structure, but on abundance of irregularity. They learned quickly, reading ground rather than relying on landmarks. The wall remained unchanged. It did not crumble. It did not open again. It did not need to. It had achieved its purpose: stability, order, permanence. The cost of that permanence was not recorded anywhere, but the Marten carried it. Not as loss, as orientation. He moved through a landscape that no longer offered him shortcuts, but still offered survival. Complexity had retreated from one line and deepened elsewhere. He adjusted without resistance, without return. The stone wall stood complete, uninterrupted, and proud of its continuity. The gaps were gone, and with them went the illusion that the land owed passage to those who learned it once. The Marten lived on, not along the wall, but away from it, in places where nothing stayed fixed long enough to trap movement into a single answer, and where survival still depended on reading what remained open rather than insisting on what had been closed.